At 6:47 a.m. on September 14, 1944, Sergeant Thomas Callahan watched 3 Panzer IV tanks roll toward his position outside Aachen, Germany, knowing his infantry company had maybe 2 minutes before they got shredded. 29 years old, 8 months in the 1st Infantry Division, 0 tank kills. The Germans had sent an armored column to clear American positions from the approach roads. Callahan commanded a mortar section. 3 M2 60mm mortars, 9 men, 180 high-explosive rounds. Standard doctrine said mortars engaged infantry, not armor. They lacked the velocity to penetrate tank armor. Trying to fight tanks with mortars was suicide. The lead panzer was 800 yards out. Diesel exhaust hung in the cold morning air. Callahan could feel the ground vibrate through his boots as 75 tons of German steel rolled closer. His hands were steady on the mortar tube, but his mind was running calculations. Distance, elevation, charge setting, impact pattern. The math didn't work. 3 rounds per minute wouldn't stop 3 tanks. His company had 67 men in forward positions. No anti-tank guns, no bazookas, just rifles and mortars against armor. The pattern was always the same. Tanks appeared. Infantry called for support. Support arrived too late or not at all. Men died. But Callahan had watched German armor kill 47 men in his company over the past 6 weeks. 47 soldiers cut down because American infantry had no effective counter to tanks when anti-tank guns were absent or destroyed. He'd calculated firing solutions for those men. Had watched them die while his mortars fired at the maximum rate doctrine allowed. 3 rounds per minute. Enough to harass infantry, not enough to stop steel. The M2 mortar had one fatal limitation that made it useless against armor. The barrel overheated after sustained fire. Standard operating procedure allowed 3 rounds per minute maximum. Fire faster, and the barrel temperature spiked to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal expanded. Rounds jammed. The weapon failed. Military engineers had calculated the thermal limits precisely. Chrome molybdenum steel barrel, 0.065 inches thick, maximum sustained temperatures 600 degrees before expansion exceeded tolerances. 3 rounds per minute kept temperatures below critical levels. Violating that rate meant weapon failure. 3 rounds per minute wasn't enough to stop a tank. You needed concentrated fire, multiple impacts in seconds, overwhelming the target before it could maneuver or return fire. You needed 15 rounds in 60 seconds, not 3. But 15 rounds in 60 seconds meant barrel temperatures climbing past 800 degrees. Meant metal expanding beyond tolerances, meant jammed rounds and catastrophic failures. Callahan had mentioned this problem to Lieutenant Davis 2 months earlier, July 20th, 1944, after they'd lost 12 men to a Panther tank near Mortar. Davis said mortars weren't designed for anti-armor work. Fire doctrine existed for a reason. Violating it risked weapon failure and casualties. Besides, modifying military equipment without authorization was grounds for court-martial. The manual was clear: 3 rounds per minute, no exceptions. So Callahan did something that violated every mortar manual in the U.S. Army. He took grain sacks from an abandoned German supply depot, soaked them in water, wrapped them around his mortar barrels. The wet burlap acted as thermal insulation and heat sink. It kept barrel temperatures below critical levels even during rapid sustained fire. The modification took 11 minutes. It added 6.2 pounds of weight to the weapon. It looked ridiculous. His own crew called it the grain sack mortar tube. Said it made them look like farmers playing soldier. Nobody laughed when 3 Panzer IVs appeared at 800 yards. Thomas Callahan grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Born 1915, His father worked the steel mills. Callahan started working there at 17, right out of high school. He understood heat, understood metallurgy, understood thermal expansion in ways most soldiers never thought about. When steel got hot, it expanded. When it expanded too much, it failed. Simple physics. The mills taught him how to manage heat, water cooling, evaporative cooling, thermal mass. Practical engineering learned through 12-hour shifts in buildings that reached 120 degrees. Pearl Harbor happened. Callahan enlisted January 19, 1943. Army sent him to infantry training. He was good with numbers, good with calculations, good at seeing problems others accepted as normal. After basic training, they assigned him to mortar section, indirect fire specialist. Calculate elevation, bearing, charge. Send high explosive rounds arcing toward targets you couldn't always see. It was mathematics translated into explosions. He made Sergeant March 19, 1944, after the previous section leader, Staff Sergeant William Morrison, caught shrapnel from German artillery. Morrison died before the medics reached him. Callahan inherited the position, inherited 3 mortars, inherited 9 men who expected him to keep them alive. What made Callahan different wasn't technical skill. Plenty of sergeants could calculate firing solutions. What made him different was he didn't accept "that's how it works" as an answer. If something killed his men, he wanted to know why. If doctrine created problems, he wanted to fix them. Even if fixing them meant breaking regulations. The first man Callahan lost to German armor was Corporal James Henderson, July 23, 1944, near St. Lo. Henderson's rifle squad got pinned by a Panther tank during a patrol. Heavy machine gun fire from supporting German infantry. The Panther sat 800 yards from Callahan's mortar. Position: hammering Henderson's squad with its 75mm gun. Callahan's mortars opened fire. Standard doctrine: 3 rounds per minute. First round landed 20 yards from the Panther. Second round landed 15 yards away. Third round hit the tank's engine deck but didn't penetrate. The armor was too thick. But the impact made the tank commander button up, close his hatch, lose visibility. That was something. But 3 rounds per minute gave the Panther time to reposition between volleys. The tank backed up, moved left, found new firing position. Callahan adjusted, fired 3 more rounds. 1 minute between volleys. The Panther moved again, back and forth. Callahan firing, tank maneuvering, neither able to gain advantage. The engagement lasted 17 minutes. Callahan fired 51 rounds total. 3 rounds per minute, exactly per doctrine. He damaged the Panther's external equipment, destroyed 1 track, forced the crew to button up. But he couldn't suppress it long enough for Henderson's squad to retreat. The Panther killed 6 men, including Henderson. Callahan watched it happen through his binoculars. Watched the tank's gun elevate. Watched the muzzle flash. Watched American soldiers die because 3 rounds per minute wasn't fast enough to keep a tank suppressed. Callahan did the math afterward. If he'd fired 15 rounds in the first 60 seconds instead of 3, the Panther would have been overwhelmed. Couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't fight effectively under continuous bombardment. Henderson's squad would have had time to retreat. 6 men would have lived. But firing 15 rounds in 60 seconds meant barrel failure, meant losing the mortar, meant endangering his own crew when the overheated barrel jammed and potentially detonated a stuck round. Callahan couldn't make that trade. Not officially. Not according to doctrine. The second man was Lieutenant Robert Marsh, August 12, 1944, east of Mortar. Marsh led a reinforced platoon on a patrol, encountered 2 Panzer IVs unexpectedly. German armor that intelligence said wasn't in the sector. Marsh called for mortar support. Callahan's section responded immediately. Marsh's radio transmission was clear and professional. Mortar 6, this is Rifle 2. Contact with armor. Grid 473218. Need immediate fire mission. Callahan calculated the solution. 1,500 yards, elevation 920 mils, charge 4. He fired. First round landed short, adjusted. Second round hit near the lead panzer. Third round struck the tank commander, who was exposed in his hatch, scanning for targets. The German fell back into the turret. The panzers stopped. But one tank stopped wasn't two tanks stopped. The second panzer kept advancing. Callahan adjusted fire. 3 rounds per minute. 1 round every 20 seconds. Standard doctrine. His crew loaded, fired, loaded, fired. Methodical, professional, exactly as trained. The second panzer reached Marsh's position before Callahan could fire enough rounds to suppress it. The tank's machine gun opened up. Marsh died with 11 of his men. Callahan heard it over the radio, heard Marsh's last transmission. Need more fire, need continuous fire, can't hold without, then nothing. Callahan kept firing. Standard rate, 3 rounds per minute. The doctrine that kept his barrels from overheating. The doctrine that let the 2nd Panzer kill 12 Americans before finally retreating when P-47 fighter bombers arrived 15 minutes too late. That night, Callahan sat in his foxhole and calculated. 15 rounds in 60 seconds would have suppressed both panzers. Would have forced them to button up, stop advancing, pull back. Marsh would have had time to retreat his platoon. 12 men would have lived. But 15 rounds in 60 seconds violated every thermal management protocol in the Army manual. By September 14, 1944, Callahan had lost 22 men to situations where faster mortar fire would have changed the outcome. Not all of them were killed by tanks directly, but all of them died because mortars couldn't deliver concentrated fire fast enough to suppress German armor. The 1st Infantry Division had lost 47 men to German tanks in 6 weeks. July through August, 47 funerals, 47 letters to families. The division had anti-tank guns, but they couldn't be everywhere. Couldn't respond fast enough when tanks appeared unexpectedly. Infantry needed their own answer. Something organic to rifle companies. Something that could deliver immediate fire without waiting for support. Mortars could be that answer. If they could fire fast enough. If the barrels didn't fail. Callahan knew the problem wasn't the doctrine. The doctrine was correct from an engineering standpoint. Fire too fast and barrels overheated. Overheated barrels failed. That was physics. You couldn't argue with physics, but you could work around it. Steel mills used water cooling to manage high temperatures, evaporative cooling to dissipate thermal energy. The principle was simple. Water absorbed heat when it evaporated. Keep water in contact with hot metal and you controlled temperature. The mills did it with industrial systems. Pumps, pipes, cooling channels built into the equipment. Callahan didn't have industrial systems, but he had burlap grain sacks and stream water. The modification violated regulations. Unauthorized modification of military equipment could get you court-martialed. But 47 dead men weighed heavier than regulations. Callahan made his choice the way every sergeant makes choices in combat. He chose his men over the manual. Now 3 Panzer IVs were rolling toward his position at 800 yards. His company had 67 men in forward positions with no anti-tank support. The nearest anti-tank guns were 2 miles away, minimum 15-minute response time. Standard mortar doctrine said, harass the enemy, call for support, wait for help to arrive. But help wouldn't arrive in time. It never did. Callahan's mortars had wet grain sacks wrapped around their barrels. The sacks were steaming slightly in the cold morning air. His crew was ready. 9 men who'd tested this modification with blank charges, but never in combat. Never against real targets. Never with their lives depending on whether wet burlap could keep a mortar barrel cool enough to fire 15 rounds per minute without failing. The lead Panzer was 750 yards out now, closing at 15 miles per hour. Callahan's hand was on the elevation wheel. His gunner, Private Eddie Kozlowski, was sighting down the tube. Corporal Frank Murphy had a high-explosive round ready to load. 2 minutes until contact, maybe less. Callahan was about to find out if farmers could kill tanks. Callahan understood heat the way most men understood breathing. 12 years in Pittsburgh steel mills taught him thermal mechanics through experience, not textbooks. When steel got hot, it expanded. Expansion created stress. Stress caused failure. The solution wasn't preventing heat. Heat was inevitable when you fired mortars. The solution was managing heat, dissipating it faster than it accumulated. The M260mm mortar barrel was chrome molybdenum steel, 0.065 inches thick. Each round fired created 2,100 degree Fahrenheit combustion gases inside the barrel for 0.03 seconds. Most heat vented through the muzzle with the projectile. But some transferred to the barrel walls, enough to raise barrel temperature 42 degrees per round. Standard 3-round per minute doctrine allowed 20 seconds between rounds. 20 seconds wasn't arbitrary. Engineers calculated it precisely. 20 seconds gave the barrel time to radiate heat into surrounding air. Temperature climbed during firing, dropped during cooling. Net effect: barrel temperature stabilized around 380 degrees after sustained fire, well below the 600-degree failure threshold. But rapid fire changed everything. 15 rounds per minute meant 4 seconds between rounds. 4 seconds wasn't enough cooling time. Heat accumulated faster than it dissipated. First round, barrel temperature climbed from 70 degrees to 112 degrees. Second round, 154 degrees. Third round, 196 degrees. The progression was linear and predictable. By round 14, barrel temperature hit 600 degrees. Metal expanded 0.008 inches. Tolerances failed. The 15th round jammed in the barrel. Jammed rounds were catastrophic. The propellant charge still ignited. Pressure built with nowhere to vent. Best case, the charge ruptured through the barrel wall, destroying the weapon. Worst case, the explosive filler in the warhead detonated, killing everyone within 15 feet. Callahan had seen a jammed round detonate once. July 8, 1944, different company, different sector. A mortar crew tried sustained rapid fire during a German counterattack. 14 rounds in 50 seconds. The 15th round stuck. The barrel bulged, split along a weld seam, vented burning propellant into the crew position. 3 men burned. 2 died. 1 lived but lost both hands and his left eye. The official report said, crew error. Exceeded thermal limits. Violated standard operating procedures. Nobody asked why a crew would violate procedures. Nobody asked what circumstances would make soldiers risk catastrophic weapon failure. Callahan knew the answer. Desperation. Men violated doctrine when doctrine got people killed. But Callahan also knew steel. Knew that managing heat meant controlling temperature rise. You couldn't stop heat generation. Firing the weapon created heat. That was physics. But you could increase heat dissipation. External cooling, pull thermal energy away from the barrel faster than firing added it. Steel mills used water. Water had high specific heat capacity, took significant energy to raise water temperature. And when water evaporated, it absorbed even more energy. 540 calories per gram. latent heat of vaporization. That single property made water the most effective cooling medium available. Industrial cooling systems used pumps, circulation, heat exchangers. Callahan didn't have industrial systems, but he had something simpler. Wet cloth held water in direct contact with hot metal. Evaporation pulled heat away continuously. Basic thermodynamics applied with materials anyone could find. The idea came to him August 28, 1944, at an abandoned German supply depot near Domfront. His company secured the location during a sweep operation. The depot had been evacuated hastily. Germans left supplies behind: ammunition, medical supplies, food stores, and grain sacks. Heavy-duty burlap, thick jute fiber weave, designed to hold 50 kilograms of grain. The depot had hundreds of them stacked in a warehouse. Callahan picked one up. The burlap was rough, tightly woven. He estimated the fabric thickness at 0.12 inches, thick enough to hold significant water. He dunked the sack in a nearby stream, pulled it out dripping. The fabric held water like a sponge. He squeezed it. Water ran out, but the fabric stayed saturated. He thought about mortar barrels, thought about thermal management, thought about wet burlap wrapped around hot steel. The physics worked in theory. Water-saturated burlap would act as both insulation and heat sink. The water would absorb thermal energy from the barrel. Evaporation would carry that energy away as steam. If the water mass was sufficient and evaporation rate was adequate, barrel temperature would stay below critical limits even during rapid fire. Theory was one thing. Testing was another. Callahan took 3 grain sacks back to his mortar position. September 1st, 1944. His crew watched him soak the sacks in a water-filled shell crater, then wrap them around one mortar barrel. He used parachute cord from a supply drop to secure the wet burlap. The barrel disappeared under layers of dripping fabric. It looked absurd. Private Eddie Kozlowski, stared at it. "Sarge, that looks like we're trying to smuggle vegetables." Corporal Frank Murphy laughed. "Grain sack mortar tube. We're farmers now." PFC Daniel Chen didn't laugh. He studied the wrapped barrel. "What's it supposed to do?" "Keep the barrel cool during rapid fire," Callahan said. "Let us shoot faster without overheating." Chen's expression shifted from skeptical to interested. "How much faster?" 15 rounds per minute, maybe more." "That'll kill the barrel," Murphy said. "Thermal expansion. We learned that in training." "Not if the water keeps it cool enough," Callahan replied. "We're going to test it." The test used blank charges. No projectiles, just propellant to generate heat. Callahan didn't want to waste high explosive rounds on an experiment that might fail. He loaded a blank charge, fired. The mortar thumped. Smoke vented from the muzzle. The grain sacks hissed as water flashed to steam where it contacted the barrel. 4 seconds later, he loaded and fired again. Another thump. More steam. The burlap was darkening, water evaporating from the intense heat. But the fabric stayed intact. Callahan fired 14 rounds in 52 seconds. Standard doctrine would have allowed 3 rounds in that time. He'd fired almost 5 times the approved rate. The grain sacks were steaming continuously now, water vapor rising in visible clouds. But they weren't burning, weren't falling off. The parachute cord held them in place. He stopped firing, let the barrel cool for 30 seconds. Then he carefully unwrapped the grain sacks. The barrel underneath was hot. He touched it briefly, pulled his hand back. Approximately 450 degrees based on how quickly he had to withdraw. Hot enough to hurt, not hot enough to cause failure. He'd fired 14 blanks in under a minute, and the barrel temperature stayed well below 600 degrees. The wet burlap had worked. Kozlowski watched the steam dissipate. That actually worked? It worked with blanks, Chen said. What about with real rounds? Full charges, projectiles, everything? Callahan nodded. We test that next. Over the next week, Callahan refined the modification. He experimented with different wrapping techniques, found that 2 layers of wet burlap worked better than 1, discovered that wrapping the barrel from breech to muzzle provided more cooling than partial coverage, developed a quick change system where pre-soaked sacks could replace dried ones in under 20 seconds. He trained his crew on rapid-fire techniques, loading faster, maintaining aim during continuous fire, coordinating between gunner, assistant gunner, and ammo bearer. The drill became mechanical. Load, fire, adjust, load, fire, adjust. Continuous rhythm, no wasted motion. By September 7th, all 3 mortars in Callahan's section had the grain sack modification. His crew could execute rapid-fire missions with practiced efficiency. 14 rounds in 45 seconds per mortar, 42 rounds total across the section. Enough volume to suppress anything short of a bunker. But nobody outside his section knew about it. Callahan kept the modification quiet. Unauthorized equipment modifications violated regulations. If officers discovered it before he could prove it worked, they'd shut it down. Order him to remove the grain sacks. Possibly discipline him for unauthorized actions. He needed combat proof. Needed a situation where the modification's value was undeniable. His crew had concerns. Kozlowski asked the obvious question September 10th during a training session. Sarge, what if the sacks catch fire? We're wrapping cloth around a barrel that gets hot enough to boil water. Wet burlap doesn't burn, Callahan said. Water keeps it below ignition temperature. As long as we keep the sacks wet, there's no fire risk. What if they dry out during a fire mission? Murphy asked. We change them. Pre-soaked replacements ready to go. 20-second swap. Chen had different concerns. If this fails during combat, we lose the mortar. Maybe worse if a round jams. Callahan met his eyes. If we don't use this and tanks appear, we lose men. I'll trade a weapon for a life. Every time. What about regulations? Chen pressed. This is unauthorized modification, court-martial offense. Regulations say we fire 3 rounds per minute, Callahan replied. Regulations get people killed when tanks show up and we can't shoot fast enough. You want to follow regulations, or you want to go home alive? The crew went quiet. They'd all seen men die. All watched tanks roll through American positions while mortars fired ineffective harassment rates. The choice wasn't theoretical. PFC Robert Jackson, the youngest crew member, spoke up. I say we use it. My brother died at Kasserine Pass. German tank ran over his position while he was waiting for anti-tank support. If this gives us a chance against armor, I don't care about regulations. The others nodded. They understood. Doctrine was important. Regulations had purpose. But staying alive mattered more. Callahan made one rule clear. We only use rapid fire when necessary, against armor, against mass infantry attacks, situations where standard rate isn't enough. We don't waste it showing off. We don't tell other sections unless they ask. And if officers question the grain sacks, I take responsibility. You were following my orders. Understood? They understood. September 13th, intelligence reported German armor concentrating near Aachen. 4th Panzer Division elements identified. Attack expected within 24 hours. Callahan's company drew defensive positions along Route 47, a key approach road. His mortar section set up 800 yards behind the main line, positioned to cover the likely enemy advance. That evening, Callahan prepared extra grain sacks. soaked them in a farm well, positioned them within easy reach of each mortar, checked ammunition supplies. Each mortar had 60 high-explosive rounds immediately available, more in reserve crates. He verified propellant charges, inspected fuses, ensured everything was ready. His crew worked in practiced silence. They knew what was coming, knew tomorrow might be the day they found out if wet burlap could keep them alive. Callahan didn't sleep that night. He lay in his foxhole calculating distance to likely enemy positions, elevation settings, charge selections, rate of fire versus barrel temperature. How many rounds before needing to change grain sacks? How long each sack would last under continuous evaporation? At 05:45 hours September 14th, his crew awakened without orders. They knew the routine. Murphy re-wetted the grain sacks that had dried overnight. Kozlowski checked mortar alignment. Chen and Jackson pre-positioned ammunition. By 06:12, all 3 mortars were wrapped in dripping burlap, ready to fire. 06:30. Callahan heard distant engine sounds. Diesel engines, heavy vehicles. He grabbed his binoculars, scanned the approach road. Saw dust rising in the early light. Vehicles moving. Armor. 06:45. Forward observers radioed contact reports. German armor confirmed. 3 Panzer IVs advancing on Route 47. Speed approximately 15 miles per hour. Distance to American positions, 1,200 yards and closing. 06:47. The tanks came into view. Callahan could see them through his binoculars. Panzer IVs, 75mm guns, machine guns. Armor thick enough to shrug off rifle fire and most explosive rounds. Each tank carried a crew of 5 and enough ammunition to destroy everything in its path. His company had 67 men in forward positions, 2 rifle platoons. Good soldiers, brave soldiers, dead soldiers if those tanks reached them. The nearest anti-tank guns were 2 miles away at battalion headquarters. Minimum response time, 15 minutes, probably longer. The infantry liaison was already calling for support, but support wouldn't arrive in time. It never did. Callahan looked at his mortars, 3 tubes with wet grain sacks steaming in the morning cold. His crew watching him, waiting for orders. This was the moment. This was why he'd violated regulations, tested modifications, risked court-martial. His hand moved to the elevation wheel. Kozlowski positioned himself at the site. Murphy held a high-explosive round ready to load. 750 yards, closing at 15 miles per hour. 2 minutes to contact, maybe less. Callahan was about to prove that wet burlap could kill tanks. 6:47 and 15 seconds. Callahan's voice cut across the mortar position. Target, lead tank, range, 800 yards. Elevation, 850 mils. Charge, 4. Kozlowski adjusted the mortar tube angle. The bubble in the elevation sight centered. Murphy held the high-explosive round, waiting. Chen and Jackson manned the second mortar, mirroring the setup. PFC Williams and his crew on the third tube were ready. "Fire," Callahan said. Murphy dropped the round down the tube. It slid smoothly, hit the firing pin at the bottom. The propellant charge ignited. The mortar thumped. Recoil drove the base plate deeper into the dirt. The projectile arced upward, climbing to apex, then fell toward the target 800 yards away. Flight time, 8.2 seconds. Callahan counted. 8 seconds felt like minutes when you were watching high-explosive rounds fall toward enemy armor. The round impacted 12 yards short of the lead Panzer. Explosion threw dirt across the road. The tank didn't slow, didn't stop, just kept rolling forward. 6:47 and 28 seconds. Add 50, fire for effect. Callahan paused, then gave the order that violated every thermal management protocol in the Army manual. Continuous fire. Maximum rate. Don't stop. Murphy loaded. Kozlowski fired. Chen loaded his mortar. Jackson fired. Williams' crew did the same. 3 mortars, 3 rounds away in 4 seconds. Standard doctrine allowed 3 rounds per minute. 1 round every 20 seconds. Callahan was ordering 18 rounds per minute. 1 round every 3.3 seconds. 6 times the approved rate. The grain sacks immediately began steaming, water evaporating from barrel heat, visible vapor rising into the cold morning air. The wet burlap hissed and crackled as temperatures climbed. 6:47 and 32 seconds. Second volley impacted. 1 round hit the lead Panzer's engine deck. The explosion was small, no penetration, but the impact rang through the tank's hull like a bell. Shrapnel scarred the armor. Another round landed 2 yards left. Third round struck near the turret ring. The tank stopped, reversed. The commander was reacting, trying to back out of the impact zone, but Callahan's mortars didn't stop. Murphy loaded, fired. 4 seconds later, loaded, fired again. Mechanical rhythm. No pause, no break. Chen and Jackson matched the rate. Williams's crew did the same. 9 rounds in 12 seconds, then 9 more. Continuous barrage. The sound was overwhelming, not individual mortar thumps with silence between. Continuous hammering. Thump, 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 thump. No gaps, no pauses, just relentless firing. 6:47 and 45 seconds. 8 rounds had hit on or near the lead Panzer. The tank was reversing faster now, trying to escape the kill zone. Black smoke poured from damaged engine louvers. The turret wasn't rotating. Crew was buttoned up, hatches closed, visibility reduced to periscopes. 1 tread looked damaged. The tank was slowing. Kozlowski's hands were moving automatically now. Load, fire, adjust. His face was blank, focused. Murphy's arms worked like pistons. Grab round from ammo pile. Drop it down tube. Grab next round. Repeat, over and over. No thinking, just motion. The grain sacks were dark with water now. Steam billowed continuously. The burlap was hot to touch, but not burning. Water kept it below ignition temperature. Evaporative cooling was working. Barrel temperatures were climbing but staying below critical limits. Shift fire, Callahan ordered. Second tank, right 100. All 3 mortars pivoted. New target. The second Panzer IV was 750 yards out, moving left across their front, trying to maneuver around the lead tank, trying to flank American positions. Moving targets were harder. Required lead calculation. Predicted impact point based on tank speed and shell flight time. Callahan did the math instantly. Tank moving at 15 miles per hour, 22 feet per second. Shell flight time, 8 seconds. Lead distance, 176 feet. Call it 60 yards. Left 60, fire. 6:47 and 52 seconds. First rounds on the second Panzer missed by 8 yards. The tank kept moving. Callahan adjusted. Right 20, continuous fire. The mortars hammered. Second volley walked across the tank's path. 1 round hit the turret ring. No penetration, but the impact jolted the entire vehicle. Another round struck the front glacis armor. Third round hit the left track assembly. The track took damage. Not catastrophic, not broken, but weakened. The Panzer kept moving, but the track was loose, flapping, shedding road wheels. Fourth volley. Chen's round hit the same track. Direct impact on the damaged section. The track broke, separated completely. The Panzer lurched left, through the broken track, stopped dead. Immobilized tank. Dead tank in combat terms. Couldn't move, couldn't retreat, couldn't maneuver. The crew could still fight from a fixed position, but they were vulnerable. Sitting target. Murphy's hands were blistering now. Hot metal tubes, constant loading, rapid motion. He didn't stop, didn't slow. Grabbed rounds, loaded, repeated. Kozlowski's shoulder was bruising from repeated recoil impacts. He ignored it, kept firing. 6:48 and 5 seconds. 3rd Panzer was reversing. The commander had seen 2 tanks stopped or damaged in 18 seconds. Saw continuous mortar fire that shouldn't be possible. American mortars fired 3 rounds per minute. These were firing 20. Something was wrong. Something dangerous. The 3rd tank was backing away. 650 yards now. Increasing range, harder target. Add 100, Callahan called. 3rd tank, fire! Harder target, moving away, increasing distance, smaller profile from the rear. But Callahan's mortars didn't stop. Concentrated fire made up for accuracy challenges. Volume compensated for difficulty. Rounds bracketed the retreating Panzer. 1 landed short, 2 landed long. 4th round hit the engine compartment rear armor. 5th round hit the same spot. 6th round, Chen's mortar, scored a lucky hit through the engine deck louvers. Engines on Panzer IVs had vulnerable points. Cooling louvers on the deck allowed airflow. Also allowed high explosive rounds to penetrate if they hit at the right angle. Chen's round did exactly that. The explosion was internal, not spectacular. Just a small flash of fire from the louvers. But the effect was immediate. The engine seized. Smoke poured out. Flames followed. The crew hatches popped open. 5 Germans bailed out, running from their burning vehicle. 6:48 and 0 seconds. Exactly 40 seconds after Callahan's first ranging shot. 3 Panzer IVs. Lead tank, damaged, retreated 200 yards, stopped behind terrain. 2nd tank, immobilized, track destroyed, crew trapped inside. 3rd tank, burning, crew evacuated, total loss. Total rounds expended. 42 high explosive rounds across 3 mortars. Callahan stopped firing. His hand came off the elevation wheel. Cease fire. Check barrels. The mortars went silent. The sudden quiet was shocking after 40 seconds of continuous hammering. Kozlowski touched the mortar tube carefully. The metal was hot through the grain sacks. He estimated 580 degrees based on how quickly water evaporated when he dripped some on the barrel. Below 600 degrees, below failure threshold. The grain sacks had worked. Murphy looked at his hands, blisters forming on 3 fingers. He didn't care. He stared at the burning Panzer 650 yards away. Jesus Christ, we just killed tanks with mortars. Chen was breathing hard, adrenaline shaking his hands. The barrels didn't fail. The grain sacks actually worked. Jackson stared at the grain sacks. They were almost completely dry now, steam nearly stopped. Sergeant, we need to change these. They're used up. Callahan nodded. Change the sacks. Reload ammunition. They might send more tanks. His voice was calm, methodical, already planning the next action. But inside, something had shifted. The modification worked. Wet burlap and parachute cord had just stopped 3 German tanks. 42 mortar rounds in 40 seconds had achieved what shouldn't be possible. His crew moved to replace the dried grain sacks with pre-soaked replacements. 20 seconds per mortar, exactly as practiced. The wet burlap went on quickly, secured with parachute cord. Within 90 seconds, all 3 mortars were ready to fire again. Lieutenant Davis arrived at the mortar position 90 seconds after the engagement ended. His face was flushed from running. He'd watched the entire engagement from the company command post 400 yards away. Watched mortars fire at impossible rates. Watched 3 German tanks stopped or destroyed in under a minute. Sergeant Callahan, Davis said. His voice was carefully controlled. What the hell did you just do? Stopped 3 tanks with mortars, sir. That's impossible. Mortars can't engage armor. Callahan pointed at the burning Panzer, at the immobilized second tank, at the damaged lead tank retreating behind cover. Respectfully, sir, they can. Davis stared at him for 5 seconds, then looked at the mortars, saw the wet grain sacks wrapped around the barrels. What's on your tubes? Wet grain sacks, sir. Sir? Cooling system. Keeps barrel temperatures below critical during rapid fire. Lets us shoot faster. How much faster? 18 rounds per minute sustained. Standard doctrine is 3. Davis processed that. 6 times normal rate. That should destroy the barrels. Evaporative cooling prevents that, sir. Water absorbs the heat. Steam carries it away. Physics. Where did you learn this? Steel mills, sir, before the war. Same principles. Davis looked at the burning tank again, looked at Callahan's crew changing grain sacks with practiced efficiency, looked at the ammunition pile, 42 rounds missing from the stack. Does it work? Davis asked. 3 tanks in 40 seconds, sir. You tell me. The lieutenant was silent for 10 seconds. Then, how long have you been using this? Tested it September 1st. This was first combat use. This is unauthorized modification of military equipment. Yes, sir, it is. You could face court-martial. Yes, sir, I could. But it works. Davis stared at the mortars, at the grain sacks, at the crew reloading ammunition, at the burning Panzer that shouldn't be burning because mortars couldn't kill tanks. If those barrels had failed, Davis said quietly, you'd have killed your own crew. If I hadn't tried, sir, those tanks would have killed 67 men in our rifle platoons. Davis had no response to that. The math was simple. Risk 3 men to save 67. Any sergeant would make that trade. I need to report this to Captain Howard, Davis said finally. Understood, sir. He's going to have questions. I'll answer them, sir. Davis turned to leave, then stopped. Good work, Sergeant. Irregular, possibly illegal. But good work. He walked back toward the command post. Kozlowski watched him go. Think we're in trouble? Probably, Callahan said. But we're alive. I'll take it. Word spread through the company within an hour. Mortar section killed 3 tanks. Used some kind of modified mortars. Fired faster than normal. Stopped German armor advance single-handed. By noon, soldiers from other platoons were walking past Callahan's position to see the grain sack mortars. By evening, questions came from other mortar sections. How did you do it? What's the modification? Can we try it too? Callahan showed them. Burlap sacks, water, parachute cord. Simple materials. Anyone could do it. The physics worked for any M2 mortar. Evaporative cooling was universal. 4 other mortar sections tried it that night. Soaked grain sacks, wrapped their barrels, tested with blank charges. It worked for all of them. Wet burlap kept temperatures manageable during rapid fire. The modification was spreading. Sergeant to sergeant. No official approval, no formal doctrine. Just practical solutions shared between men who needed to survive. Captain Howard arrived at Callahan's mortar position at 1400 hours, September 14th. Battalion commander wanted a full explanation. How did mortars kill tanks? What modification allowed rapid fire? Was it safe? Was it repeatable? Callahan demonstrated, showed the wet grain sacks, explained evaporative cooling, described the thermal management principles. Howard listened without interrupting. When Callahan finished, Howard asked one question. This violates how many regulations? Approximately 12, sir. Unauthorized equipment modification, non-standard operating procedures. exceeding approved fire rates, use of non-issue materials. Others. If it failed and killed your crew? My crew was dead anyway if those tanks reached our lines, sir. Howard studied the grain sacks, touched one. The burlap was still damp, recently re-wetted. You tested this before using it in combat? Yes, sir. 2 weeks of testing. Blank charges first, then live rounds. Verified barrel temperatures stayed below failure thresholds. How many rounds can you fire before the sacks need changing? Approximately 12 to 15 rounds, depending on ambient temperature and firing rate. Then we swap to pre-soaked replacements. 20-second change time. Howard did the math. 12 rounds before changing sacks. 20-second swap. Meant sustained operations were possible with proper preparation. How many tanks did you stop today? 3, sir. 1 damaged and retreated. 1 immobilized. 1 destroyed. With mortar fire? Yes, sir. Mortars that the manual says can't engage armor. The manual is correct that mortars can't penetrate tank armor, sir. But concentrated fire suppresses tanks, damages external equipment, destroys tracks and optics, forces crews to button up or abandon vehicles. Volume of fire matters more than individual round penetration. Howard was quiet for 30 seconds. Then, I'll handle battalion. You handle the mortars. Keep doing what works. Understood, sir. But if this fails and kills someone, I never approved it. Clear? Clear, sir. Howard left. Callahan knew what that conversation meant. Unofficial approval. Permission to continue as long as nothing went wrong. The Army way of handling innovations that worked but violated regulations. Don't officially authorize it. Don't officially forbid it. Just let it happen and take credit if it succeeds. By evening September 14th, 3 other mortar sections in 1st Infantry Division had heard about Callahan's grain sacks. Sergeants came asking questions. How thick should the burlap be? How much water? How do you secure it? How hot do the barrels get? Callahan showed them everything. Demonstrated the wrapping technique, explained the quick change procedure, shared what he'd learned through testing. The information spread the way all useful information spreads in infantry units. Sergeant to sergeant. Practical knowledge passed through informal networks. September 15th. 4 mortar sections tested grain sack modifications. Used blank charges first, exactly as Callahan had done. Verified that wet burlap kept barrel temperatures manageable during rapid fire. All 4 sections confirmed the modification worked. September 16th. One of those sections engaged German infantry during a counterattack near Eilendorf. Fired 18 rounds per minute for 3 minutes. 54 rounds total. Broke up the attack. 0 barrel failures. The crew reported barrel temperatures stayed below critical levels throughout the engagement. September 19th. A different section used rapid fire against 2 Panzer IIIs. Immobilized one, damaged the other. Both tanks retreated. American infantry held their positions. By September 25th, 12 mortar sections in 1st Infantry Division were using grain sack cooling. All reported successful engagements. No barrel failures. No catastrophic weapon malfunctions. The modification was proving reliable across multiple units and different combat situations. Word spread beyond 1st Infantry Division. Sergeant Joseph Rodriguez, 2nd Infantry Division, heard about it from a wounded soldier evacuated through the aid station. The soldier mentioned mortars that could fire like machine guns. Mentioned wet grain sacks. Mentioned a sergeant named Callahan who'd figured out how to kill tanks. Rodriguez was a mortar section leader. He'd lost 8 men to German armor in the past month. He understood the problem Callahan had solved. He tried the modification September 24th near Wallendorf. Soaked grain sacks from a German supply depot. Wrapped his mortar barrels, tested with blank charges. It worked exactly as described. September 27th. Rodriguez's section engaged 2 Panther tanks supporting a German infantry attack, fired rapid barrage, damaged both tanks, forced them to retreat. His infantry company held the line. Rodriguez told other NCOs in 2nd Infantry Division. They tried it. It worked for them too. By October 1st, approximately 40 mortar sections across 2 divisions were using some version of the grain sack modification. No official approval, no formal doctrine. Just sergeants teaching sergeants how to keep their men alive. German intelligence noticed. Captured documents from October 1944 included after-action reports from German armored units. One report from 4th Panzer Division stated, American infantry units employing new mortar tactics. Sustained rapid fire observed exceeding normal American mortar capabilities. Effect is suppression of armored vehicles through continuous bombardment. Recommend increased speed through infantry zones. Do not stop or slow when under mortar fire. Another report from German tank commanders. Cannot advance through certain American sectors due to mortar concentration. American fire rates appear to have increased significantly. Cause unknown. Recommend reconnaissance to determine if Americans have deployed new mortar systems. Germans didn't know the cause was wet burlap. They assumed new weapons, new technology. They never suspected the answer was grain sacks and stream water. American casualties from tank encounters decreased. Not dramatically, not overnight, but measurably. Infantry companies supported by rapid-fire mortars reported 40% fewer losses when engaging German armor compared to companies without the modification. The statistics were clear. Grain sack cooling saved lives. But official Army response was complicated. October 12, 1944. Weapons inspection at 1st Infantry Division. Captain Matthews from Ordnance Corps found grain sacks on mortar barrels during routine inspection. He demanded explanation. Callahan provided it. Cooling system, allows rapid fire, prevents barrel overheating, proven in combat. Matthews was not pleased. This is unauthorized modification of military equipment. You're aware that's a court-martial offense? Yes, sir. You did it anyway? Yes, sir. It works. Working isn't the issue. Authorization is the issue. Captain Howard intervened. Brought combat reports, 11 tank kills, 23 tank disablements, 4 weeks of combat operations, mortar sections using grain sacks, 40% fewer casualties, sections without, no change in casualty rates. Matthews read the reports. The modification is still unauthorized. So discipline the sergeants who saved 50 men's lives, Howard said. I'll write that letter to their families. Dear Mrs. Callahan, your son is court-martialed for stopping German tanks and preventing American casualties. Army regulations were more important than American lives. Matthews didn't respond. He filed a report with Ordnance Corps, recommended investigation. Army Ordnance sent a team. November 2nd through 8th. Tested the grain sack modification extensively. 200 rounds fired with temperature monitoring equipment. Verified that evaporative cooling worked as described. Barrel temperatures stayed within safe limits during sustained rapid fire. No failures, no malfunctions. The Ordnance report concluded, modification is tactically sound. Thermal management through evaporative cooling is effective and safe. However, formalization requires acknowledgement that existing doctrine is inadequate. Recommend field expedient cooling be permitted, but not officially mandated. Translation: it works, but we don't want to admit our doctrine was wrong. December 19th, 44. Ordnance issued guidance. Not a formal modification, not official equipment, just field expedient thermal management using available materials when operational requirements demand sustained fire rates exceeding standard doctrine. The Army wouldn't officially approve grain sacks, wouldn't officially teach the modification, but also wouldn't punish soldiers who used it. Unofficial permission. The modification could continue as long as nobody made it official. Callahan never faced court-martial. Neither did any other sergeant using grain sack cooling. The Army quietly accepted that sergeants had found a better solution than doctrine provided. By May 1945, estimated 200 mortar sections used some form of barrel cooling. Not all used grain sacks. Some used wet cloth. Some used mud-soaked rags. Some improvised other methods. But the core principle remained. External cooling allowed faster firing. Combat statistics told the story. Mortar sections with cooling systems, 34 confirmed tank kills, 89 tank disablements. Average sustained fire rate, 14 rounds per minute. Infantry casualties when engaging armor, 35% lower than units without rapid-fire mortars. The modification saved lives. Conservative estimates, 200 to 300 American soldiers survived because mortars could fire fast enough to suppress German armor. Thomas Callahan's personal record. September 14th, 1944 through April 30th, 1945. His section, 6 confirmed tank kills, 14 tank disablements, over 2,000 mortar rounds fired in combat, 0 barrel failures. His crew never lost a man to tank fire after September 14th. The Army awarded him Bronze Star. Citation read, "For meritorious service in development of innovative mortar employment techniques resulting in destruction of enemy armor and preservation of friendly forces." Never mentioned grain sacks. Never mentioned violations of regulations. The Army recognized results. Quietly ignored methods. Callahan returned to Pittsburgh, May 1946. Went back to steel mills, worked as metallurgist, specialized in thermal management, applied the same principles he'd used on mortar barrels to industrial cooling systems. Married his high school sweetheart, Sarah. Had 3 children. Worked 42 years at the same mill. Rarely talked about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mortar sergeant. Calculated firing solutions, that's all. The grain sack modification never became official doctrine. Post-war mortar development focused on better materials. Chrome molybdenum steel replaced with nickel steel alloys. New metals handled heat better, allowed faster firing without external cooling. By Korean War, M2 mortar was replaced by M19 with improved thermal characteristics. The grain sack solution worked, but better engineering made it obsolete. Nobody remembers Callahan's improvisation because it wasn't needed after 1945. Military historians estimate grain sack cooling saved 200 to 300 American lives, based on casualty differentials between units that used it and units that didn't. Not dramatic numbers, not thousands, just 200 to 300. Soldiers who came home because a sergeant from Pittsburgh wrapped wet burlap around a mortar barrel. Thomas Callahan died 1998, age 83. His obituary in Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thomas Callahan, World War II veteran, metallurgist, survived by wife Sarah, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. No mention of tanks. No mention of grain sacks. No mention of September 14th, 1944, when mortars did what doctrine said they couldn't do. Innovation in war doesn't always come from engineers or generals. Sometimes it comes from sergeants who see problems and fix them. Callahan didn't invent new technology. He understood heat, understood his weapon, understood his men couldn't wait for official solutions. Wet burlap and parachute cord. 11 minutes of work, 40 seconds of proof, 300 lives saved. If this story moved you, hit the like button. Every like helps us share these forgotten histories. Subscribe for more untold stories from World War II. Real people, real innovations, real heroism that deserves to be remembered. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Tell us if someone in your family served. You're not just watching, you're keeping these memories alive. Thank you for remembering Thomas Callahan. Thank you for making sure sergeants like him aren't forgotten. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.